Okay. I love the way she says that. Right. Hello, well, I'm Ross from Britain's Hidden History, and we've got our arch druid researcher, Bob Morgan, back again with another interesting subject, which is this church of Stoke Dry. And is it St. Edmund, or is it actually the story of King Arthur in America? Who knows? Well, Bob will tell us more. We'll all know more then. So good morning, Bob. How are you, sir?
I'm fine.
You're all ready? Pardon?
I'm ready to go.
Ready to go. All right, without further ado, let's go straight in now. Leave it over to you.
Let's kick off then. Okay, if we start up, share the screens, and let's get into what I've got here. And the first thing we need
is
a little, and then from the beginning. Here we go.
From the beginning, good place to start.
Okay, so it's all about Stoke Andrew's Church, Stoke Dry, Rutland, and there's the postcode if anyone wants to go and look at it to make it easy to get to. And basically, this is the church where there's a wall painting showing a king being shot by arrows by Indians. And is this King Arthur? One has to ask because of the context. So if we look at where the church is, it's between Leicester and Peterborough. It's about 20 minutes to half an hour off the M1 motorway, which is, I was up north and I just made a slight detour to go and look at it. And I must say, I underestimated how interesting this church was. And I didn't have enough time really to do what I wanted, what I wanted to do. There are so many things to look at and so many details in the church which are worthy of consideration.
I'm sure Lynn heartily agreed with you, Bob.
Yeah, very much so. I had to buy a very expensive lunch. This is all I can say. The Stoke Dry isn't a village. It's more hamlet. There are only 14 houses in there, and if you can see the cursor, the church is here, basically sort of midway down the hamlet. And one of the first things I was looking at when I was looking at the old Ordnance Survey map here was the shape of the churchyard. Was it circular, rectangular, square? It's got a bit of a circular shape to it. So I had to then look on the LiDAR map, and you can see it's on basically a bit of a peninsula sticking out from higher land. They've built up the land to make a level platform, and there is an indication that there could have been like an ovalish, circulish original churchyards there. So which indicates it could potentially be possibly an old church on much older than what's there today. The other thing about the LiDAR now is that there's a higher resolution that's now been available now. You've got 0.5 centimeters to 1 meter resolution. Previously, 2 meter resolution was what you could get for most of the country, 1 meter resolution in certain parts, but this new release now is a higher resolution, which will help out, providing that the coverage is for the area that you're looking at. And as we know, to our cost, wherever we're looking, there isn't LiDAR coverage.
Let's hope they can just manage to fill in those little gaps that they accidentally left last time. Yeah.
No, it's amazing how it just cuts out what you're trying to look at. Here's the church itself, and as I said, it's a very unusual and a very intriguing church. It's a pleasant enough looking church, but it's got some odd quirks and details. If we look at the floor plan, the present church dates from the 12th century, so it's basically sort of Norman. But as I said, there's potential that it was on the site of an older church. The chancel, this end here, is part of the old. We'll go back again. The chancel is part of the old, where you can see some of the old fabric of the early church. But the early church was probably included the nave without the north and south aisles. So it's probably a rectangular church. And then over the period of time, they've added a north aisle, a south aisle, and the Digby chapel. If you go in there, the wall painting that shows the king being shot by Indians is in the Digby chapel. As I said, it's quite an intriguing church in many ways, and one of them is the actual church tower. If you look at the church tower, it's very slim, very, very slim, and out of proportion to the rest of the church. The foundations of it date back to the tower date back to the 13th century. So there was some kind of church, some kind of tower on the original church, but it's totally out of proportion, and it's quite weird. The other interesting thing is this lancet window here in the window. You know, this lancet window here, early English lancet window. That's
Sorry, Bob. Where are you pointing for the lancet window? I can't see that.
Right-hand photograph.
Oh, I got it. The bottom of the tower. Okay.
Yeah, the very tall, narrow window there.
Yeah.
In a church tower, that's I've not seen that before. So that again is quite unusual. And the mainstream historians and academics think that window was originally came from the west wall of the church, of the original church. So there's, it's just interesting for its quirkiness. Inside the church, this is the nave in the south aisle. It's quite a pleasant little church. You can see the font, which isn't the original font, it's been replaced, as we see later. Then we come to a view from the nave to the chancel area, which is the oldest part of the church. And the first thing you see on this is the rood, this wooden structure between the nave and the chancel. And again, it's obvious that this is not an original structure. This has been taken from another church and put into it for whatever reason. The other thing you can see here is you can actually see some of the, if I can find my cursor, you can see some of the wall paintings here. One St. Andrew is on the crucifixion of St. Andrew is on one side here. If we go into the chancel, you can see part of the original Norman string course. Now, this is why this church is dated to the Norman times, because of this.
Sorry. What? Sorry, the string court.
The string course, the stringer course. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's
it's got the typical Norman dog tooth that you normally see around Norman church entrances. Around the arch, it's normally around the church arch. And this then is the basis for which is, it's actually ascribed to the Norman period. The thing about this stringer course here is that it's not thought to be in its original location. Oh, God, where am I gone? It's not thought to be in its original location, which is...
sorry, Bob, can you just give some ideas there? You mentioned the screen or the rod, and this, they're not from the original location. Do you know why they think that?
Well, the rood, because it doesn't fit. It's out of proportion.
That's a good clue,
Simply, if you were building one for this church, you wouldn't build it like that. It's actually, the proportions of it and what it's doing in terms of the arch. If you can see here, in terms of the arch here, it's very sensitive. This.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly, isn't it? Really?
It's cutting the arch at a position where it wouldn't do on a normal road, and it's too big, and it's not right. It just doesn't fit.
It looks quite ugly there, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay.
The other thing to notice is the columns either side. This one and this one here, and they're very interesting because they got some interesting stone carvings on them, which we'll see later on. We're going the other way now. Right, in the chancel, you've got the stained glass window. All well. And then you've got on the, in there, it's an old bier, which they used to transport coffins on. That long, what looks like a wheelbarrow. And on that, they've got some old Bibles and prayer books. None of them are much older than the late 1700s. So they're not really old Bibles. And I think leaving it in a church, if they were really old Bibles, leaving it in a church which is unlocked would not be a good thing to do. And what you see behind the bier is quite interesting, because that's the original font. If you see. So if anyone's interested in stonework and can date churches from from the design and work on the font, that's the one to look at. But like all things, as we know, fonts were often recut, as they went down through the thing. So, but it's potentially that could be one thing which could potentially show that this church might be a bit older than Norman times, which is what the mainstream historians tell us. You got an alabaster tomb, effigy of Digby, his wife, and 11 children. The Digbys are the local family who basically ruled the roost in the area following the Norman conquest. And some of the Digbys were also represented the area in Parliament in later times. You've also got this little interesting window here. See it next, if I can find my pen. This one? Oh, so sensitive. See the little window there? And that's to enable people in the Digby Chapel, which is the adjoining, if you like, the adjoining room, so that when they're in the Digby Chapel, they could see the preacher when he was preaching in the church, whilst they were in their own little chapel. All the peasants were in the nave. They were in their little chapel, and they got this little window so they can see the priest and basically tell him, come on, pub's open, get move on with the sermon. So, if you're rich, you can have these little, sort of things. Then we go into the Digby Chapel itself, and this is where it becomes a little bit disturbing. When I got there, there's this chair. You can see on the left-hand picture the wall painting showing the king being shot by arrows. But in front of it is this sign saying, "Beware of falling plaster." Very worrying. So, the immediate concern is the plaster falling off the wall painting? As far as I can tell, looking at it, there aren't any recent scars on the wall painting. But if you look above into the ceiling, there are definitely the ceiling plaster work is very decayed and potentially is falling down. So at this moment in time, I'm thinking it's probably the warning is, if you're standing there, you might be hit by chunks of plaster from the ceiling. But it is worrying that it's there. As I said, I couldn't see any recent scars on the plasterwork of the wall painting itself. And then if we look at the wall painting, here we are, the classic thing. You've got the king being shot by arrows. On the right-hand side, we've got St. Christopher and the baby Jesus on his shoulder. That's what the mainstream are telling us. The mainstream are telling us that this is actually King Edmund being shot by arrows by Vikings or Danes. That's what they tell us. I mean, King Edmund himself is quite an interesting character. I found out. I didn't know much about him at all before I went here, but on reading up about him, he's King of East Anglia, born about 841 AD, and ruled as King of East Anglia from about 855 AD. But almost nothing is known about him, and it's coming back to the same problem we had with Sutton Hoo. The Vikings destroyed all of the church records when they made their raids, and so there's nothing, no documents or nothing to show that of him at all.
This is the bizarre thing, isn't it? I mean, the amount of attacks we get about British records and Welsh history, when there's quite a lot of references and details, and yet people like King Edmund seem to get through scot-free. And I remember I looked at this a year ago, and it's hardly anything that even existed. No, to find any contemporary documents about him at all is just impossible, right? The first reference I found about him was in the Anglo Chronicle. It was written about 20 years after his death. And basically the story goes that in 869, the Great Heathen Army, aka Vikings, Danes, also known as the Viking Great Army,
They were basically a coalition of Scandinavian warriors, and mostly from Denmark, and they advanced on East Anglia and killed Edmund. And according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, again, this is coming back to some of the details of the mainstream story and that historians give us. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, he died in battle. It didn't say he was tied to a tree and shot by arrows. That's a later tradition that's sort of grown up after the event. And basically, they're saying he was tied to a tree and shot by the Danes because he refused the Danes' demand that he renounce Christ and adopt their pagan ways. So the tradition is basically that they tied him to this tree, and what you see above his head here, this is supposed to be an artistic rendering of a tree, an artistic interpretation of a tree.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about those three because they do remind me of something else.
Yeah, yeah, they remind me of something else as well. But anyway, the mainstream theory is that those are an artistic, it's an artistically rendered tree.
I mean, they do look remarkably like the three feathers on a Welsh rugby jersey, don't they?
Yeah, they do, don't they? Anyway, they tied him to this tree, and it was a living tree, so it wasn't a stake. It was a living tree, which is why you got that artistic rendering. Then they beat him up with rods. And then they shot arrows into him, and apparently he still wouldn't renounce his Christian ways. So they then beheaded him, and then threw his head into a nearby forest. And then these are all the later legends that have been sort of piled on top of, because none of this is coming from contemporary sources. It's all later. Church legends and traditions added later. And then the amazing thing on this was his head was here to be called in from the wood, hic hic hic, which in Latin is here here here, and they all went off to search him, and then they found his head between the paws of a wolf who was guarding it for them, and then they got his head and they took him back and buried him. So he was buried nearby to where he's killed, according to the tradition, and a wooden chapel was built on it. And then later on, around 890, he was removed from there and taken to what is now Bury St Edmunds, where it was Canute, I think it was, actually built him a stone chapel, and so he was Bury St Edmunds, which is, obviously then the name Bury St Edmunds comes from St Edmunds himself. It was called, there is an old English name for it. Well, I won't even try to pronounce it because I couldn't do it. And then, a community was founded there to take care of the shrine, and that's how Bury St Edmunds grown up. The other thing about it was that the Viking raid that happened there, they killed him, and they obviously then started to take control of East Anglia, and they basically killed off all organized religion because they were pagans for a century. The odd thing about the story is that it's mentioned in quite a few church documents that the Vikings and the Danes actually about 30 to 50 years after they killed him, venerated him, and they produce a whole pile of coinage commemorating him, which seems a bit odd. You tie someone to a tree, you shoot lots of arrows into him, behead him, and then all of a sudden you're making coins to commemorate him as some kind of local hero or good king or good ruler or whatever. It all seems a bit odd and a bit strange to me. Anyway, when Edmund's remains were in 1010 temporarily taken away from Bury St Edmunds because they wanted to protect him from the Vikings in some way. So I'm quite, I've got to look into and find out what was happening around, at that point where the Vikings who suddenly were commemorating him and suddenly turned around and were now trying to get rid of his body. And anyway, in 1020, King Canute built a stone abbey in Bury St Edmunds, and then replaced it by a larger one in 1065 when it goes on. And the thing is, the shrine of Bury St Edmunds became the most prosperous and most well-visited pilgrimage sites in Britain, strangely enough. So it's a bit of a money earner. And this is the interesting bit that I didn't actually know until I started looking into this, that Edmund was actually the patron saint of England at that, he was regarded as the patron saint of England until he was replaced by St. George in 1348, when Edward III formed the Order of the Garter and made St. George the patron of that, and at the same time declared him to be the patron saint of Britain.
Yes, gets into very interesting water there, because another video is about obviously the original George Gwaerydd and
well, it's very interesting.
You've
got the four nations, and yet the only one whose patron saint is from the very nation is Wales.
Yes.
But the other interesting thing in today's terms, bearing in mind the current situation we're in, is Edmund is also patron saint of pandemics. So
that's a great thing to be a patron saint of.
Yeah, quite a timely visit on my behalf.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah, excellent.
In 2006, a big attempt was made to reinstate Edmund as patron saint of Britain, of England, which I didn't know about. But the petition that they launched and all the actions they were taking were rejected by the government, predictably. And in 2013, there was another campaign launched to reinstate him, but that one was backed by the Green King Brewery, based in Bury St Edmunds, and I think that one was a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a bit of a cheap advertising stunt. But again, predictably, that's failed. So if we go on and look at the pictures in a little bit more detail, we got this stylized tree. And the main thing that everyone's obviously going to be looking and focusing on is the Indians. If you look at the details of the Indians, I mean, the one on the left, show that to any child in the country, and they're going to say Indian. The one on the right perhaps is a little bit more, little less definitive, because it's not quite clear what is actually on his head. If you look at the detail, if I can find my cursor, what you can see is he's got a line here. He's got some kind of band or in a cap or hood over which this other headgear is fitted. Now the headgear looks, the way it's drawn there, as some kind of almost like a helmet, and in some senses you could look at this. You could look at it like you could look at this bit here. One way you could look at it is he's wearing actually a suit of armor helmet, and that's the visor which has been pushed upwards. One interpretation of it. Another interpretation of it is he's got some kind of a hooded hood which fits around his neck with some kind of a protection above it. They're keep that image in your.
It looks more like just got a straightforward feather sticking up and long.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think the one on the left, you could have no argument.
Yeah,
that is definitely. I've seen nothing else in medieval drawings or anything like that, which would indicate that there were headdresses like that in this country or where the Vikings or Danes. The one on the right is a little bit more problematic, I think, because it's not quite so clear cut, and I think you can interpret that one in different ways. The other thing to look at is what they're wearing as well, because you've got, if I can find my cursor and I can do it gently enough not to go on to the next one. Oh, I can't. If you look at the joint where his hands, there's a line there which indicates he's wearing some kind of, it looks like a tight-fitting tunic or jersey. If you look onto the left-hand side, again, he's got the same thing. He's wearing some kind of a garb. And the interesting thing to look at is, if we go on to the next one, that's a simple comparison between the guy on the left, and the red, what is undoubtedly a red Indian on the right. There's lots of similarities, and one of them is
First Nation Americans, we have to say now, yeah.
First Nations, yeah, okay. One of them is these. I feel like I'm in trouble with my cursor. These little triangles here, which are reflected on the drawing of the Indian. You've got the
good observation. Yeah, on the headband.
Yeah, on the headband. So there's lots of good matches there. Even the face itself is more reminiscent of an Indian than a lot of other things I've seen. So I think on that one, you can't say case 100% proof, but it's a high probability that is showing some kind of an Indian. I'm not so certain on the other one. But I went and looked at some other types of Indian headdress. And you can see that, your idea of it being a feather is not out of the way at all. These are not kind of headdresses that you normally would associate with Red Indians. But these are all coming from paintings of the Red Indians done in the early 1800s. And again, what you're looking at, if you take, for example, the left-hand one, he's got some kind of a turban thing like that, but it's coming down the back of his head as well. All of them have got something which is coming down the back of their head, which could account for
these are excellent. They're very different to the normal image we associate, aren't they, with the First Nation people?
Yeah, and this, I think, is where it bears more research. Because,
a lot more, the guy on the left, like you said, it's very, very similar.
There's a greater variation of headdress amongst Red Indians than certainly I was aware of. And the guy on the right, again, has got something which, they've all got these something hanging down their neck, which could account for the, which can account for the way that that second Indian is drawn. If we look at the details of the clothing, the thing that's interesting here, I think, is I cannot move this cursor without moving it. I can't find it again. Here we are. What's interesting here
might help.
Pardon?
You can use the up and down cursor on the keyboard.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Try that perhaps.
Well, no, that didn't work either. If I can find my cursor, here we are. What's interesting on this one is that he seems to be wearing, whatever clothing he's wearing is dual color down the middle. And again, you can see the lines on at his wrists indicating that he's wearing some kind of a tunic or shirt. And again, you can see that it's tied at the waist, and you can see these little things here, which means that it's like ruched over the top of the belt. One of the things that I'm looking at is, could this, it's almost like you see Red Indians with like a blanket over their shoulder. And is that what that coloured, is what that right hand side of his body is represented? Could it be a blanket over his shoulder? It's just the way that it's been drawn, because whoever drew this had never seen a Red Indian in their life. But again, the mainstream historians can't really, give you much steer on what they believe these costumes to be, because again, they don't seem typical of the medieval period. If we move to the one on the right, he's wearing some kind of a apron, but again, you've got this again where it's tied. Oh, geez, it's so sensitive. Where it's tied, it keeps disappearing. Where's it gone to? Yeah, where it's tied here. See, again, it's coming. The wire he's wearing, it's coming over the top of the waist, tied it tightly. So if you have a shirt and it's bunched over where you tied the belt tightly. But it's a bit of a strange outfit, It's a bit of like an apron worn back to front. And again, one of my things I'm looking at is to see whether I can find that there's any reference to that with Red Indians. Did they have that kind of a outfit on? Then we look at the feet. The feet on the left-hand side are the feet of the king who's being shot, And you can see quite clearly that his feet are tied. It seems to be some kind of a belt rather than a rope. It's not how ropes indicate. If we'll see later on how they indicated ropes on the drawings. And on the right-hand side, this is the second Indian on the right-hand side of the king. He's clearly wearing some shoes of some description, moccasins, shoes, or whatever. One of the arguments put forward by historians is that these are definitely not Indians, because he's supposed to be wearing so tights, basically, men in tights like Robin Hood and all the rest of them, and that's evidenced by this line at his ankle. My view on that is, well, perhaps he's not wearing tights, perhaps his legs are bare. The line at his ankle is quite clearly just there to delineate the shoes. So again, you can see that these images there's a lot of interpretation on these images that you can put. And we're coming back to the Sutton Hoo situation again. You find a buried boat, and it's unique in Britain. So then you look for the context and you find, oh, Viking boats, and then all of a sudden that's what your boat is. It's become a Viking boat because it's the only context you can find. What they've done here with this drawing is they can't explain it because it looks like Indians, and from this date it can't possibly be Indians because we haven't got to the New World by then officially. So mainstream historians then have a problem, but the only reference point that they got then that they can put this drawing to is King Edmund, because they know he was put up against a tree and shot down. So automatically they're looking at it from that context and interpreting everything on that drawing in that context. We've come along now with another context and say, well, it could possibly be King Arthur. And we're looking at it in that context, and we're picking out details then which match that context and that context. And between the two of them, the two of them are mutually exclusive. but it depending on which side of the you can argue points each way, and that's the disappointing thing, I think.
I agree with you, because the general policy seems to be decide a narrative and then make the evidence fit.
Yes. And if you stand back dispassionately, I don't think there's any doubt to my mind at all that the person on the left, that Indian on the left-hand side, is an Indian. Anything else? The one on the right-hand side, I might give you, well, I'm not so certain. I'm very less confident on that one than on the left-hand side. And it's the context which you then look at and interpreting. But the problem is you need to keep a wide as mind as you can and look at the details and things. The worrying thing on this is you can see the state of the wall painting. It's disappearing. I won't say it's disappearing before your very eyes, because I've looked at some of the historic photographs, and much of the detail is still there. But every year that goes by, these paintings are fading, if not actually flaking off. And you can see there's large areas where. What's frustrating to me is that some of the areas that contain the detail which you need in order to look at something else. I would like some of the details so I can go off and look at where, did Red Indians have this detail? Or is that on the other side? Is that supported by a Norman or a Viking, sort of origin? So it's a little bit frustrating, but if anyone wants to look at this, go and see it quickly, because if you wait 5 years, it's not going to be in as good a condition as it is today. And if we were around 100 years ago, I think we could have a better idea of actually showing, trying to prove that this was actually Red Indians from America. The person on the right is St. Christopher, and again, this is the mainstream interpretation of it. St. Christopher is again one of these. He's a saint venerated by several Christian denominations. He was killed in the 3rd century by Roman emperor. Basically, again, because I don't think he would give up his Christian beliefs. But the tradition with St. Christopher is that he carried a child who was unknown to him across a river on his back. And then when he got to the other side, the child reveals himself to be Christ. So the backstory is again quite interesting. He met a hermit who instructed him in the Christian faith, and then he asked how he could serve Christ. And when the hermit suggested fasting and prayer, being a good lad, he said, "No, I'm not into that. I'm not having any of that." The hermit then suggested that because of his size, and the thing about St. Christopher is he's described as being a Canaanite, but the interesting thing about him is his height. He was supposed to be 5 cubit high, which is basically 2.3 meters, 7 foot 5 inches. So he was supposed to be a very high guy. And because of that height, the old hermit said to him, "I got a great job for someone of your size, mate. See the river there? People want to get across there. You're the man. With those long legs of yours, you can get across there and carry the people." And that's what he did. So, and he performed, in performing those services, a little child asked him to take them the cross. And during the crossing, the river becomes swollen, and the child become heavier and heavier and heavier, so much that Christopher could hardly carry him across the river. And when he finally reached the other side, he said to the child, "You have put me in great danger. I do not think the whole world could have been as heavy on my shoulders as you." And the child replied, "You had on your shoulders not only the whole world, but him who made it. I am Christ your King, who you are serving by this work." And then the child immediately vanished. So we got another one of these old church legends.
Well, there's the older version as well, isn't there, where you wanted to serve the most powerful or frightening thing in the world.
Oh yeah, see, I mean, that's before he met the hermit. He wanted to serve the most powerful thing, and he ended up.
When he went to the devil turned his face away from Jesus because he's afraid of Jesus.
So there's a tremendous backstory there, all they're quite interesting, and I'm sure that there's a load of meaning in it if you only look at the details.
It's got lots of symbolism, isn't it? And the water's important and all that kind of thing. Yeah. You could talk about St. Christopher all day. It's a marvelous.
No, exactly. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is supposed to be St. Christopher. If you look at him. The interesting thing with St. Christopher, I think, in this drawing is the hat. It's a normal pilgrim type shaped hat, but again, it's got those little dog legs on it. Yeah. Now, that is unique. I'm not the only person to have said I've not seen one of those before on any depictions of St. Christopher. And I had a quick look through the books. There's quite a few art historians who actually say that this picture is fairly unique. They haven't come across another one with showing the hat with those things. So again, what are those little dog legs? What do they mean? Why are they there?
Because I think there's... With a lot of paintings of Christopher, there's quite a bit of symbolism on the belt usually, isn't there? And this belt is remarkably plain from what I can see here.
No, his belt seems remarkably plain. He also seems, if you look, he seems to be, there's some kind of purse or belt suspended from it, which is now not visible. And this is frustrating. You can't see what the details are to look at it. And he's also got some kind of a collar around his neck. You could spend hours looking at these, trying to interpret them, and the sad fact of life is there's not much left to look at. I mean, if you look at the figure of Christ, there's hardly anything left of him at all. In the chancel, you've got a wall painting of St. Andrew, another interesting character. So, he's obviously one of the apostles, one of the disciples, brother of Peter. And again, there's an interesting backstory as to how he became the patron saint of Scotland. It's another one of those. If you look back, if you remember the work we did on when we looked at the Synod of Whitby, in looking at that, St. Andrew's role in Scotland was reinforced and put to the fore in Scotland following the Synod of Whitby, because at the Synod of Whitby, the Roman Church used St. Peter and the keys to heaven as the way to persuade the King of Northumberland to accept Christianity. And when they went back, retreated to Iona, they decide we ain't having anything with this Peter thing. We're going to put forward Andrew. He's a much better guy than that Peter.
Yeah, as Alan Wilson always says, no one actually explained where these keys were kept, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, there's a whole interesting story in looking at that. The stone columns are interesting in themselves. You could spend all day there looking at these and trying to look at them. There's all kinds of stuff in there, and none of it is satisfactorily explained by historians or the church people. It's all interesting stuff. It's quite naive carving, and it's certainly not up there with the likes of the Templar Church up in Scotland. But there's interesting stuff in it. Interestingly, the left-hand photograph is a bell ringer, and it's believed to be one of the earliest representations of a bell ringer in England, carved into stone.
The style on, particularly the left one, is very reminiscent of the Llewellyn stone or the Llewellyn stone.
Yeah.
I know it's for another story. Just the style and the kind of
I got to say,
around the edges and stuff just feels like
this was where I was running out of time, because I could spend all day looking at these and then trying to go.
So keen, yeah.
Yeah, and then trying to go back and then fit them into what they're similar to, where they come from. The middle one is again the subject to controversy, because some of the historians claim that it's a picture of the devil with his hands to his ears because of the bell ringing on the left-hand side. And other historians just say it's a neighbor of the church rather than the devil. And then you've got this like cat-like, and sometimes referred to as a lion, on the right-hand side. So all interesting stuff. That, I mean, you could say, if you go to this church, please allow a long time to look at it, because the detail in there is amazing. On the clerestory wall, you've got the tribes of Israel, which again is an interesting painting. Note Zebulun and Joseph, and Zebulun being one of I think the sixth child of Jacob, isn't it? So that's interesting. That's obviously a much later and a much more sophisticated painting than the King Arthur and the arrows.
Has any attempt been made to read what's written up there? Seems to be some words in the centre, isn't it?
Yeah, this is something I want to look into, because it's later. It's divorced from the main reason from going to the church. But as I said, you go to this church, you come away from there again, like everything else, more questions than answers, and more avenues to look into, more hours of fun and looking through books trying to understand what's going on here. If we look at coming back to this thing about context, if we look at other tapestries and wall paintings of Edmund, here's one in St Edmund's Cathedral, Bury St Edmunds. It's obviously a later tapestry. Look at the way these ones are actually clearly depicted as Vikings or Danes, and they've got the helmets on with the horns, which really the Vikings didn't have. But you can see the representation there. That's
discussion, the horns, isn't it? There we are. Yeah. That's another topic.
That's quite clearly a depiction of showing Vikings and Danes. And also beneath King Edmund, if you look, you can see the wolf with his head between his paws, which is part of the legend. So that's an interesting one. Here's a more typical. This is from a miniature from about 1450, and again you can see that the archers there dressed not as Vikings, but they're in more contemporary medieval gear, and St Edmund is tied up against a tree and being shot with arrows. You notice that his feet aren't so tied to the tree. And then we look at the martyrdom of St Edmund, the medieval wall painting in Pickering Parish Church. Now, this one again, you can see that he's quite clearly tied to the tree. You can see the tree roots. What you need to look at on this one in relation to the second Indian is this headgear here. See it on the left-hand side, the very left-hand archer. Now, mainstream interpretation would say that's what that Indian is wearing. And, you know, when on face value, you look at that and they say, yeah, that does look very remarkably similar to that, which is why I'm not so convinced on the second Indian. The first one, undoubtedly, and the big question that they've got to answer is, right, how did someone paint an Indian, you know, in the 13th century when we didn't get to America to the 15th century? And that's the question that's got to be answered. And then the final slide I've got basically is there is a monument to King Edmund where he was actually supposed to be put against a tree and shot. And on that monument, it says basically St. Edmund the Martyr, AD 870. The date normally given for his martyrdom is 869, but apparently the Scandinavian year didn't start till September. So, you know, there's a difference of 1 year because of that fact. But the oak tree, which used to stand there, fell in 1843 by its own weight. And that is supposedly the oak tree to which he was tied up. And that's in, I don't know how you pronounce that. How would you pronounce that, Ross? Hoxton? Hoxton?
Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, Hoxton, I think.
Hoxton.
Yeah, I'd go with Hoxton. Yeah.
So it's on Abbey Hill, Hoxton. I'm actually out that way in Suffolk in September, so this is one of the places I'm going to go and have a look at, just have a poke around.
Lynn will be so excited.
No, she will be actually. She's ecstatic about it. But so, you know, it's a very unusual, very interesting church, and the last thing I'm going to say on is, if you're interested in looking at this picture of potentially King Arthur being killed by arrows,
get up there,
go sooner rather than later, because every day that goes by, those paintings are fading and flaking, and you know, within 20, 30 years, there's going to be a lot less to see than there is today, and that means that you won't be able to analyze, interpret, or you know, work out what's going on. You know, at some point in time,
you know,
it's going to be lost completely.
Yeah,
and you know, steps really should be taken to preserve it, because it is an important, even if they don't,
whatever
what we think it is, it's still in its own right. It's important enough to be preserved.
At least slap some PVA on it, you know.
Yeah.
Solution to the world.
I mean, it should be at least decently photographed in various, you know, so ultraviolet lights, X-ray, all kinds of things like that. Because
has that not been done then? That seems bizarre, because I mean, that's an easy job, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's an easy job, but you know, one of the things that's in my mind, for example, is that second Indian on the right-hand side with what appears to be that helmet. Could that helmet have been overpainted? You know, what was, you know, could it have been overpainted on there because someone said, you know, people didn't wear helmets like that. Oh, we'll convert it to what we know. And, you know, unless you do that work, you don't know. But by the time anyone ever gets around to doing it, it might be too late. You know,
it might be all ruined anyway. Brilliant.
It might be all gone. Well, so get there now.
Yeah, well, thank you. Excellent information. I feel much better informed on this, because it's a subject that keeps cropping up. This whole idea of, is this some sort of illustration of Arthur's journey, should we say, to America back in the 6th century? And there's also, it is fascinating, isn't it? Because we could go on all about the stuff about why it's called dry and why it's where it is.
Yeah, no. There's a lot more to look at and work out on this. But the big question for the mainstream theories is, they've got to show, if it's not a red Indian on that left-hand side. Yeah.
Why is there a guy? Yeah, why is there a guy with loads of feathers? Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to show me another medieval drawing showing that people wore that kind of headgear around town in the 1100s or something like that. You know, it was all the fashion for about, you know, a couple of months. You know,
something doesn't add up.
The must-have accessory of the year.
Well, that's a challenge to everybody watching. Let's find us some pictures of more medieval or earlier British people with feather headdresses. we're not
And
First
again,
Nation. And
again, I think using our American context, we got to, you could see that the American, the Red Indian headdresses were a lot more varied than certainly I thought.
Yeah, that was an interesting surprise. Yeah, I just went with the bonnets. I think they're the Plains Indians, aren't they?
Yeah.
Whereas you get, like I say, on East Coast, you got a lot more clothing and different kind of hats and all that kind of stuff.
So it's quite potentially that there are types of Indian headdress which will actually match the second Indian's attire,
Excellent.
precisely. I only had a quick trawl through, and I was quite surprised at the wide variety that came up. And again, if we can match that one with the left arm one, it's almost slam dunk, case proved.
There we go. Well, thank you very much. All right, hope everyone enjoyed that. I look forward to the comments. Please don't go charging around about not using the word First Nation. It's in the context of when the paintings were produced, all right? No offense intended. So until the next time, my very best wishes to everybody. Heddwch.
Bye.